Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. But let's move on to Mike and fake review attacks, which there are essentially two pieces this week. One is a transcript of our previous discussion that focuses on that, and then the next article that you've written is about how to defend against fake review attacks. So, Mike, what's going on, and what's your?
So, let me just give a little background first. So, fake review attacks have became at Google a negative SEO tactic. That was, you could go out and buy fake review attacks against your competitors, and the review algorithm filter that was updated a year ago, March, finally implemented some technology that looked at both the reviews and the context of the reviews, as well as the reviewers, and was basically filtering reviews from local guides that seemed to be part of an attack. So in February, February 1st, Google published an article in which we mentioned this last week, apologized to the local guides and loosened the filters, letting more reviews through. Now, when this happens, there's always a flip side to the coin. Fewer missing review reports show up in the Google My Business forums, but more reports of fake review attacks show up, which did. And so for me, the question then becomes, how does a business cope with this? And I have put together sort of this 8-point guide in an article that goes through the steps. The first step is to read the relatively new guidelines on Google Maps, user-generated content guidelines, where they consolidate into one-page content guidelines as they apply to all content in Google Maps, and they provide a lot of detail. These don't always match the actual reasons Google gives you to take down a review, but they're useful to understand both how Google is viewing it and also if you need to do an appeal. So you read that. Google now has if you go to the Google support forum or the support help files, there's a remove review button or help page with a button on it that actually drives you through the process of requesting a review removal, which is all good. They immediately email you and indicate that they've received your request. And then very shortly thereafter, they usually send you another email, often denying your request and suggesting you respond to the negative review. What they don't tell you, and which they just recently added to their help files, is they actually have an appeal process when your reviews are rejected. So if you go back to that same place and that same interface, you can see the status of the rejected review, and you are told you have one-time opportunity to appeal it. So even though they didn't tell you this in any of the emails, if you know about it, you can appeal it and increase your chances of getting it taken down, at which point it'll probably be rejected again, or maybe it won't be. But they do send you a case number at that point. So in other words, there's actually internal documentation. It isn't just a machine process, although it's probably still done offshore. And then what they don't tell you at that point after that rejection is that if you escalate it to the forums, product experts, silver and higher, can escalate it one more time through a form, which often will result in a takedown. And then so that's an appeal to the appeal. And beyond that, the final step is that the product expert can actually escalate it to the community manager, who then takes it over to and gets another human review on it, if there's some real argument based on the removal rules. So interesting, there's this whole process that if you follow it, I have found that not only can you have reviews taken down, but you can have user accounts taken down, which is much more painful to the spammers because creating accounts is expensive, and creating trusted local guide spam accounts is costly. And if you can get those taken down, that's a good thing. And this new sort of process, as arcane and hidden and obtuse as it is, actually can result in both the review and the reviewers being the local guide.
This process, right up until the point where you said a product expert escalates this through a form, the process sounds like it could be automated through a Zap. I imagine that the emails are very templated and come from the same address.
Yeah, but they don't always send email. That's the problem. It's like they should be, But you're right; it could be automated through Zap, and you could do that, and that's a good point. And up to that point, but there's some issue here that Google. What's Google's responsibility to communicate to you that there's actually an appeal process? They obfuscate that in the emails, and they don't tell you. But you're right; that could be automated.
I'm exhausted listening to you describe this process, Mike.
It's an exhausting process, and it when you step back, it's like, why is this so complicated?
What business owner, agencies, people working on behalf of the business, and very, very determined individuals, or people who are really suffering at the hands of some sort of fake review attack, might be motivated to do this. But what business owner is going to do this? Nobody has time for this process, unless it's an existential threat to your livelihood, which I guess in some cases it is. People
and businesses, even when it isn't, even when they've got 400 reviews and they got 20 fake reviews, which don't have this huge impact, business owners react very viscerally to a fake review attack. It is perceived by them as an existential threat. And so I have written out this 8-step guide, and I publish it in the Google Forums regularly. I am now publishing it in Near Media. And, surprisingly, I get work helping people go through this arcane process. It's like, I say, look, you can go do it for free. Go do it in the forum. Here are the steps. And they say,
as Greg said, nobody has time or effort, energy to put into this. So,
yeah, I get it. But Google's oddly created a whole new marketplace, right? Because of this arcane process, which is bullshit. The whole thing is bullshit. But
you're like a review Sherpa, Mike.
There you go. Help you achieve the heights of fake review elimination.
Well, what's interesting is, what will happen in Europe with fake reviews. Google, a lot of what we're seeing in this, one of the things that we saw in some user research that David alluded to is that the local PACs are all over the place these days. They're often not at the top of the page, they're in the middle of the page. It's wildly variable, which is really interesting. Some of that is responding to the no self-preferencing rules that now exist in Europe, I'm convinced, and some of the algorithm enhancements that Google's done with the fake review algorithm are probably also responding to forthcoming regulations in Europe to take down inaccurate, incorrect, whatever.
Well, I think the recent publication of the appeal process has been in place for almost a year, but their recent publication of a help file on that is probably along those lines to comply, so that you can file a review, takedown request, and you can file a review, and that is public information that Google now surfaces recently in their support files. So I think that's probably part of that thinking, is to show the authorities that there is a process in place. Right. And then there's the appeal to the appeal and the appeal to the appeal of the appeal process.
Well,
they don't tell you about.
But it seems like we're sort of settling into some new bureaucratic normal maybe there are some ways in which this reality is better than the one that predated it, but it just seems like this is some kind of morass of mirrors and hide the ball and kind of cat and mouse that will just exist in perpetuity now, unless Google is compelled to change the process again.
So you're suggesting that we live in a world of whack-a-mole and we're the ones responsible for doing the whacking? Yes, I think.
Well, something like that.
Human condition has not improved as a result.
Well, there's this sort of notion that's in the background, I think, for all these companies, that things will improve. Right? Problems are identified, things get better, bugs get fixed, injustices get remedied, and it feels like we maybe have reached some new sort of, I don't want to say new normal, some new kind of equilibrium or what is the word I'm looking for? Homeostasis of sorts, where it's just some kind of crazy cat and mouse game with fake review purveyors and Google with its new algorithm and these weird bureaucratic appeal processes. And it's just a mess for
Right.
everybody.
And to add to this story, Google has improved the appeal process, is taking out local guides and local guide reviews. And now spammers have moved over to spamming LSA reviews, fake reviews on LSA, which have currently no mechanism for either reporting the review or having the reviewer removed. So you're absolutely right. This is like this weird cycle, and the spammers are smart, and they've started to move away from local guides into, when appropriate, local service ad reviews that Google has no mechanism to take down. Yeah.
We've talked before about how, there was just recently the Google versus Gonzalez case in front of the Supreme Court about the scope of Section 230 immunity for third-party content on platforms. Google doesn't have any liability for fake reviews currently, but in an LSA context where they do provide the Google Screened or Google Guaranteed badge, which is supposed to be some statement of verification, not specifically for reviews, but for the business itself, verification of licenses and other things that they're in good standing. That, I think, creates some vulnerability with the FTC for deception, consumer deception. If you've got a bunch of fake reviews on an LSA where Google is holding itself out as a guarantor of the integrity of the business, I think that creates some potential vulnerability or liability for them. I don't know if the FTC will take that up because they're overwhelmed with all kinds of other stuff, but it will be interesting to see if they do and how Google responds to that. If they do, that's many.
I don't see liability as the potential impetus for Google actually fixing this problem. I'm not even say fixing it, but even just paying significant attention to it. I think that right now, this whole process that Mike just laid out is lip service. It's one sort of program manager. Well, it's one program manager saying, "Hey, what can we stitch together with the least number of resources possible?" And this is the outcome, right? And so I don't think Google's going to put a real program in place or significantly adjust its efforts in identifying spam reviews and spam accounts until the review problem gets so bad that it impacts Google from a revenue standpoint. I don't think that the potential risk of liability and Google paying a couple $1 billion fine 4 years from now by the time the FTC gets around to it or finishes its investigation, like Google's going to say, well, great, we're going to make money hand over fist in every quarter leading up to that, and a couple $1 billion will be nothing. So I think it has to be a substantial, like, we are losing X billion dollars per quarter because consumers are no longer trusting these reviews and they're going to Bing GPT or some other search engine. That is the only thing that's going to really impact the effort that Google puts into this problem.
Well, I think some of the exodus of younger users, at least in certain kinds of search categories,
but that's not specific to reviews.
It's a holistic issue. I think it involves sort of distrust of the results, the inefficiency of having to invest time in reading all of these results to get a simple restaurant recommendation, et cetera, et cetera. I think you're right that unless or until there's enormous financial pressure, Google isn't going to do more. They're sort of doing compliance. I think for the Europeans, look, we've got this process in place. Look, we're taking it. We're using a stricter, filter algorithm to address fake reviews. But I would agree with that. Just quick final. We're sort of over time, but quick final thing that was floated by the information. I didn't talk to you guys about this, but somebody in the information, a guy named Martin Pierce, who's one of the journalists there, was suggesting that Google replace Sundar Pichai for various reasons with maybe Ruth Porat, the CFO, who's originally from one of the big Wall Street firms.
She's also was at Dodge or Chrysler,
right?
And she's a ruthless cost cutter.
Right. And she's also somebody who has a lot of credibility with institutional investors, which is part of why she was brought on, I think. So that's something interesting to speculate about, how vulnerable is Sundar now and maybe some of the people working directly for him based on the kind of mishandled rollout of the Bard AI chat capability. I don't think that they're going to do anything in the near term, but I think that the door is now open if somebody is sort of saying this out loud, then it suggests that there's some other conversation going on somewhere. The door is now perhaps open for a leadership change at Google, which would be really interesting / complete the transformation of Google from a special company into an ordinary.
I would
company.
take issue with. I think it happened a long time ago. I don't think Sundar
it's
special necessarily.
No. But I mean, what I'm saying is that Google, I've said this before, that these internet companies held themselves out as different kinds of companies for various reasons, different from the Chevrons and the GEs and the Walmarts of the world. And now I think there's no distinction at all.
I think you can go all the way back to Eric Schmidt, possibly even before Eric Schmidt, to get to where Google hit that threshold of being an ordinary company.
Well, once they go public, it's a very different sort of game. But I would say Google has at least tried to maintain its values for a long time, and right up until very recently. And the recent layoffs and the way they were handled was an indicator that sort of ethos or value set has been largely set aside in favor of financial returns as the primary consideration. But what can we say? It's great to be alive. The weather in the Bay Area is improving. Those are two positive things I can say against the backdrop of a lot of
and my daffodils are coming out a month early. So
yes, global warming is supposed to be really good. That's for Western.
Is that
New York,
positive
right?
or negative? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
that's right.
Well, I mean, meanwhile in California, it's snowing in Disneyland, and people are trapped in the San Bernardino Mountains in their houses because there's so much snow. It's really a weird situation. So, okay, enough digressions. We will be back next week with more. And thanks, as always, for listening. Tell your friends, subscribe to the newsletter, and spread the word.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.